Mr. Grisham, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. All right, and now we can actually see you as well. Sir, my name is Joe Moody. I'm the chair of this committee. I appreciate your accepting an invitation to offer testimony here today. So they certainly want to be respectful of your time. Before we start, I do have to, just as a matter of housekeeping, I have you listed as John Grisham, representing yourself today and testifying neutral on the item before us. Is that correct?
Yes, I guess I'm neutral. I don't feel too neutral, but I'll say neutral.
So I'll be very clear. I don't anticipate you are very neutral in this matter whatsoever. But because there's no actual piece of legislation before us, you're technically, every witness that's testifying before us is neutral. So not to get into the mechanics of it, but I appreciate that. So with that being said, that all is correct?
Yes, that's all correct, yes.
All right. Then I don't want to take too much time on the front end. I know members might have questions once we hear from your testimony. I certainly know that the committee is specifically interested in how you got involved in Mr.
Sure.
Roberson's case,
Sure.
maybe some of your background, your experience as a trial lawyer, how you've interacted with other issues related to wrongful convictions, and ultimately got involved here, and anything else obviously that you want to offer. We'd appreciate that. Thank you, sir, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, sure, Chair Joe Moody and members of the Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence, thanks for the invitation to be here and say a few words. I wish I could be there. It's much more effective, and Austin is one of my favorite cities. I apologize for not having prepared remarks. I'm on a book tour. I don't work that much, but I'm working this time of the year when I publish. So I've been on a lot of airplanes, and I just got to New York, and so I'll just ramble for a few minutes and then take some questions. I sort of know what you're doing because years ago I was a member of the House Judiciary Committee in the Mississippi House of Representatives, and I had that for 2 terms, and we had a number of committee hearings, as you do. I don't miss any of them, so I sort of know what you're going through, what you're doing. But none of those hearings back then were nearly as important as this one right here. So it's my honor to be here to speak for Robbie Roberson. I'm also honored to be here to offer a few words of great admiration to this committee for your actions last week. You literally saved an innocent man's life. You took a bold stand against injustice at the precise moment when the courts and the leaders of the state seemed hell-bent on executing Robert. If not for you, Robert would be in his grave today. Your actions were creative, to say the least, fascinating, unique, courageous, bipartisan, and heroic. And we all watched in disbelief last Thursday night, not just in Texas, but around the country, around the world. I've talked to journalists in Europe the past few days doing book stuff, and they are fascinated by this case and by the actions that this committee took last week. So you chose to dig deep and to find the truth and recognize that Robert's life was worth fighting for. So I'm honored to be here to meet you. Robert doesn't need me to speak for himself. He has as you know by now, a great legal team made up of lawyers from Texas, Washington, and New York who have worked for many years to prove his innocence. One of those lawyers is a friend of mine in Washington, and about 8 months ago, he asked me to take a look at the case with the idea of perhaps writing an op-ed piece for a major newspaper. And I said, sure. I've been on the board of the Innocence Project in New York for a long, long time. And for the past 15 years or so, we have been more and more concerned about the shaken baby syndrome, shaken baby convictions. It's something we have studied. So I was somewhat familiar with that problem. And I said, sure, I'll take a look. My understanding is that last week you guys you committee members, got a lot of testimony about the medical and scientific evidence now available that proves that Nikki did not die because she was shaken to death by anyone. She died because of viral pneumonia, and we can prove that. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm a lawyer. And I practiced criminal law in a small town in Mississippi for 10 years. And I had a lot of cases, a lot of clients, a lot of jury trials. I tried over 100 jury trials in 10 years. And I came to really respect the idea. We just believed in the idea of a fair trial. We still do. All Americans believe in the idea of a fair trial. We at least pay lip service to that. And I never had a client in 10 years I thought was wrongfully convicted. I knew the judges, the prosecutors, the policemen, the game was played fairly. And I just never thought about wrongful convictions until I'd written probably 20 books. And I saw this case that out of Oklahoma that fascinated me about a man my age who went to death row and came within 5 days of being executed. And so I wrote my first nonfiction book, The Innocent Man, published in 2006, about Ron Williamson and what happened to him. And it was a fascinating entry into the world of wrongful convictions. I have since become convinced that there are a lot of innocent people in prison. And that's why I do this work. That's why I get involved in these cases. As a lawyer, it always bothers me when I study a case like this and I realize how unfair the trial was. Because I've been in those courtrooms many times, and I know what it takes to have a fair trial. Robert's trial was grossly unfair. There was nothing aside from the junk science. The science was terrible. The science has been debunked and discredited and disproven now for the past 15 years. We know it's bad science. The science was terrible. The jury selection was awful from the opening bell. The prosecutor was allowed to point a finger at Robert and call him a baby killer or whatever. That persisted throughout the trial until the closing argument. The absolute low point in the trial was when a ER nurse was allowed to testify that Nikki, who had been sick for her whole life, but really sick the week before she died, she had violent diarrhea, fevers, upset stomach, everything. A nurse was allowed to testify that she saw signs of sexual abuse looking at the child's anus, and there was no allegation of sexual abuse anywhere. It was not proven by the autopsy. There was nothing there. But she was allowed to testify. When I was the defense lawyers, to their credit, objected. When I was a lawyer, that would have been grounds for an automatic mistrial. There's no way a prosecutor could get by with that in most courtrooms throughout the country. That's a mistrial. You stop right then and you say, stop it. And the jury goes home and you try again. That didn't happen. The judge waved it through. And the prosecutor was allowed to keep using the sexual abuse language even in his closing argument. The trial was a farce. It was a pathetic trial. And that's what I go back to in these cases. If we could go back and get a fair trial, and I think that's all Robert and his lawyers would love right now, is to get back into court, have the CCA declare a new trial. Let's go back to Palestine, Texas, to Anderson County, or maybe change venue, whatever, and let's have a legal team that Robert can have with as many lawyers as the prosecution, as many experts as the prosecution, as much money as the prosecution, put the jury in the box, and let's have a fair trial. That's all we're asking for. I'll stop rambling now. I just listened to Dr. Phil, and I'm astonished at the amount of research he and his staff put together in preparation. It was truly remarkable. I'm not that well versed in the case. I came to it lately. I've come to it lately, but I'll try to answer any questions you may have.
Well, Mr. Grisham, I certainly appreciate that. I know you've looked at some of this from a nationwide level, right? These wrongful convictions and some of that you've been able to delve into. Are there trends that you see, problems that emerge, things that would be helpful for the committee to understand that you've seen in your broad brushstrokes over this issue nationwide?
Sure. I mean, you start with junk science. With the Innocence Project, we have, I think our number is 370 or 375, around that, DNA exonerations in the past 30 years. These are clear-cut DNA, cases where they got the wrong guy. We were able to exonerate, which is not always easy, even with DNA testing that you pass. But in those cases where we have the exonerations, junk science is prevalent in half the cases. And it's excuse me, hang on. It's the bad analysis. It's like bite mark analysis, hair analysis, boot print analysis, arson analysis, and shaken baby. It's just more. There's so much junk science in our courtrooms, and have been for the past 50 years. Unqualified experts giving opinions that are not driven by science. So junk science is a huge factor. There are many other factors that lead to wrongful convictions. Most of them are not present in Robert's case, and in some cases you have everything. You have the lying jailhouse snitch, the paid informant. You have false confessions. You have incompetent defense lawyers. There's a long, sad list of reasons for wrongful convictions, but junk science is by far probably the biggest factor that we could do something about. And Texas has done a wonderful job with the commissions founded in 2005, with the law you passed in 2013, the amendment in 2015. Texas is at the forefront of cleaning up the forensics. I wish all states were doing that.
I appreciate it. I think that's we've seen a little bit of that. We've done some research into, in fact, we did some research after the death of Timothy Cole here in Texas on wrongful convictions and what kind of some of the common threads were in those cases, so that we could start to address them. Obviously, junk science was addressed in particular in this provision, and so I think those are some very good points that everybody can take forward. I do want to make sure, and I want to respect your time. I know we've got a limited time to visit with you, but I want to make sure if there's anybody have questions, I don't want to monopolize the short time that we have to visit with you. Anybody down here? No? Over here. Then I will. Well, actually, I have a lot I want to go into about DNA cases. I want to be respectful of your time to make sure that. Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry, I do have a question. Chairman Leach?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Moody. Mr. Grisham, thank you for joining us. Let me just ask you one question. And I've read a number of your books, and Mr. Grisham actually decided to go to law school myself and become a lawyer, largely because of so much of what I've learned and gleaned about the practice of law and the importance of honest and good and knowledgeable and passionate lawyers on both sides. Can I just ask you, as someone who sees the legal landscape nationwide, and you've written about, you've researched, you know a lot about these cases, you've committed yourself to the wrongful convictions and making those right. What do you think it's going to take, understanding where we are right now in this case? What if you were us and you're trying to make the case to the other branches of government to give Mr. Roberson a new trial? What would you focus on? What to you are the most troubling aspects of this case? And what's it going to take, in your opinion, to get to achieve justice for Mr. Roberson?
Well, I hope it's not a disaster. I hope it doesn't take a wrongful execution. We do not, to my knowledge, we do not yet have a case involving clear DNA proof that we've killed the wrong person. The Death Penalty Information Center tracks all types of data for wrongful convictions and for death penalty cases, and they list about, on their website, they list about 20 cases of probable innocence. Okay, half of them are from Texas. These are probable. You can't really prove them. Okay, they're close. There's no DNA case. And so years ago, I wrote a book about the premise was, what are we going to do as a nation when we wake up one day and we know by clear DNA proof we just killed the wrong guy? That's a great question. I can't answer it. I don't know. I'm afraid we won't do much at all. I am encouraged by the declining number of death verdicts around the country, the declining number of executions, and the number of states that are outlawing the death penalty. That's a good sign. I tell my friends all the time, people who, I grew up in supporting the death penalty because I grew up, in Mississippi, Southern Baptist and all that. I tell people all the time who support the death penalty, you can't support this death penalty, but I can show you how to make one fair if you want to make it fair for everybody. And keep in mind, most capital murder defendants are guilty. The crimes are horrible. But there are too many innocent ones.
Mr. Grisham, would you agree though? And that's one area on which you and I might we definitely do disagree, because I myself am a death penalty supporter in the most heinous cases, much like Dr. Phil described earlier. But like Dr. Phil, and I think like you, and hopefully all of us, we can agree that the worst thing we could do for our criminal justice system is to execute someone who's potentially innocent. Certainly someone who's definitely innocent, but even someone who is potentially innocent with such substantial questions in a case such as this. Wouldn't you agree that pushing the pause button and going back and simply affording a new trial in front of an unbiased trier of fact so all of the evidence can be heard, wouldn't you agree that is the only right option?
Yes, especially in a case like this one, where the science has changed. Now, not all cases have this. Not all cases have, science has changed so much, or science has been discredited or proven to be not correct. But when you have a case like this where the science is just wrong, okay, it was wrong 30, 40, 50 years ago when it was first developed, sure, you have to go back to a fair trial. Let's do it all over again. Well, what's the hurry? Right.
Thank you, Mr. Grisham. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, I think about this because DNA becomes kind of the gold standard in exonerations. I mean, when we have actual innocence cases in Texas, that's kind of, we require that to be part of the combination of factors that's considered. If we don't have that, then you don't get to the actual innocence piece. Like, we feel so strongly about DNA evidence and its reliability. That's the weight we give it. But in many of those cases, in fact, I'll just ask you, I mean, you've looked at cases that were later ended in exonerations via DNA evidence. In those cases, prior to the DNA exonerating that individual, weren't there people crying out loud that this individual is still guilty, they're guilty of sin, they did this, they're adamant about the guilt of this individual, and then later DNA evidence comes out and exonerates them?
Happens all the time. And we worship DNA. However, in most murder cases, there's no DNA. There's no body fluids. There's nothing left behind it. So you have to go back to other forensics, ballistics, or identification, or whatever. Most cases don't have DNA testing available. So those are much more difficult cases to exonerate than DNA. DNA has been a lifesaver, and the police are using DNA more and more to solve crimes, to their credit.
Well, and I think you made the point I was trying to make, which is, if people will shout from the rafters that this person's still guilty over and over, and then DNA later exonerates them, but DNA is such a limited number of cases, it reasons to follow that in non-DNA cases, there are people still shouting that this person's still guilty, but in fact they probably are not. I mean, it has to, those have to correlate. They have to correspond. I just, we have such rare opportunity to have DNA evidence, which we all have a great deal of respect for, but all of these other cases that you just stated don't have that. And so, that's where a lot of this type of procedural law comes in to help alleviate those gaps where we don't have the gold standard like DNA. So I'm certainly grateful for your time, and I want to make sure none of the other members have questions. Want to be respectful of your calendar. And do we have any more? No, Mr. Grisham, thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.